I am Marla Kinney, and I've spent my life turning faded spaces into stories you can feel. There's something about a room, its bones, its scars, that whispers what it wants to be. I learned that growing up in this creaky Victorian home in upstate New York, a place my grandmother left me when I was barely old enough to sign papers. She saw something in me, even then, something my family never did. To them, I was the odd one, the kid doodling floor plans while my siblings chased real dreams. My brother Dwayne's law degree, framed and worshipped. My sister Velma's accounting job, a family parade. My sketches of chandeliers and reclaimed wood, a quirk to sigh over. I didn't just love design. It was how I breathed, how I made sense of a world that kept trying to box me in. This house, with its stained glass windows and sagging porch, became my sanctuary. I'd spend hours imagining its past. Families laughing, hearts breaking, lives unfolding. By my 30s, I'd built a quiet name for myself, restoring old homes for clients who saw what I saw. But my family? They'd roll their eyes, call it Marla's hobby, and change the subject. I never imagined my phone would ring at the perfect moment to prove them wrong. But before I tell you how my entire world flipped on my 38th birthday, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. That birthday started like any other. Me, alone in the kitchen, sipping coffee, sketching ideas for a client's library. The house smelled of old wood and lemon polish, and I felt steady, grounded. I'd been pouring everything into this place, not just money but heart, turning it into a showcase of what I could do. My company, Kinney Designs, was small but growing, and I'd landed a meeting with a developer who could change everything. A contract to restore a string of historic properties. Big money, big exposure. I was so close to proving I wasn't the family flake. But family dinners were non-negotiable, especially birthdays. My mother, Nadine, insisted on them, her way of keeping us tethered, no matter how much we drifted. She'd host at my house since it was the biggest, never mind that I'd begged her to stop. Those dinners were a gauntlet. Dwayne bragging about his corner office, Velma dissecting her latest promotion, and my cousin Floyd needling me about still playing with curtains. My father, Harlan, would just nod along, his silence louder than their jabs. I'd smile, bite my tongue, and count the minutes until they left. This year felt heavier. Maybe it was the developer deal, so close I could taste it, or the way Nadine's voice tightened when she called to confirm the dinner. "Don't be late, Marla," she'd said, like I was 16 and sneaking out. I didn't know then that they'd been planning something uglier than their usual shade. I didn't know they'd show up with papers, their desperation dressed up as righteousness, ready to rip my home out from under me. All because of money they thought I owed them. Money they thought my grandmother's trust should have split 5 ways instead of landing in my lap. I should have seen it coming. The whispers at last year's dinner, Floyd's offhand comment about fair shares, Velma's sudden interest in the house's market value. But I was too busy building something real. Something mine. I thought I could outrun their resentment. That morning, as I traced the curve of a newel post I'd spent weeks restoring, I felt untouchable. The house was more than wood and glass. It was proof I'd made it without them. I just didn't know they'd try to take it, or that I'd have to fight to keep it. I can still see myself at 16, hunched over a sketchbook in the attic, pencil smudging my fingers as I drew layouts for rooms that didn't exist. The Victorian's creaks were my music, its warped floors my canvas. I'd show my drawings to Nadine, hoping for a spark in her eyes, but she'd just pat my head and say, "That's nice, Marla, but focus on school." School was fine, but it wasn't where I came alive. Meanwhile, Dwayne's debate team trophies got a shelf in the living room, and Velma's math awards were practically laminated. My passion? It was like shouting into a void. One memory stings sharper than the rest. I was 19, home from community college for the summer, bursting to share my first real project. I'd interned with a local designer, helping restore a 1920s bungalow. We'd saved its original crown molding, sourced vintage tiles, and I'd even pitched a color scheme that the client loved. I brought photos to a family barbecue, my heart thumping with pride. I passed them to Harlan, who glanced and grunted. "Looks like a lot of work." Nadine was too busy praising Dwayne's law school acceptance to notice. Velma smirked and said, "So you're, picking paint colors for a living?" Floyd, already tipsy, laughed so hard he spilled his beer. I stuffed the photos back in my bag, face burning, and slipped away to the porch. The Victorian silhouette loomed across the street, like it was watching, waiting for me to claim it. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was how they made my wins invisible. When I got my first paid gig at 22, redesigning a bed and breakfast's lobby, nobody asked to see the before and afters. But when Velma landed a junior accountant role, Nadine threw a dinner party. When Duane passed the bar, Harlan bought him a watch. My milestones? They didn't register. I started keeping them to myself, tucking them away like secrets. By my mid-20s, I stopped trying to explain why I loved coaxing life back into old spaces. They'd never get it. The worst was when they'd compare me to Duane and Velma, like I was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. At one Christmas, Nadine sighed, "Marla, why can't you be more like your sister? Stable, you know? Stable, like my late nights drafting plans or hauling salvaged wood to clients weren't work. Like my growing client list didn't count because it wasn't a corner office or a paycheck stub." Floyd once called me the artsy one, like it was a diagnosis. Even my cousin Selma, who'd show up to family events with her real estate stories, got more nods than I did. I'd sit there stirring my coffee, wondering why my fire didn't matter. Looking back, I see how their dismissal shaped me. It made me stubborn, hungry to prove them wrong, but it also carved out a loneliness I didn't name until later. I'd walk through the Victorian at night, touching the banisters, the chipped fireplace tiles, feeling like this house was the only thing that saw me. My grandmother had left it to me, not them, and I clung to that like a lifeline. She'd known I'd protect it, pour my soul into its walls. But even that trust came with whispers. Floyd muttering about favoritism, Velma hinting the inheritance should have been split. I ignored it, focused on my work, my clients, my quiet victories. I didn't know those whispers were building to a scream, that they'd come for the house itself. That night, as I prepped for the birthday dinner, I felt the weight of all those years, their voices still echoing, telling me I'd never be enough. I'll never forget the moment it clicked. I was 26, standing in the Victorian's dusty parlor, staring at a cracked plaster medallion on the ceiling. The house was a mess, leaky pipes, peeling wallpaper, a staircase that groaned like it was begging for mercy. Most people would have seen a money pit, but I saw a story waiting to be told. That's when I knew. This house wasn't just my home. It was my chance to build something undeniable. I'd turn it into a masterpiece, a living portfolio of what I could do. No one in my family would help, so I did it alone. The first years were brutal. I was juggling freelance gigs, small jobs like staging condos or picking fabrics for fussy clients, while sinking every spare dollar into the house. I'd spend nights sanding floors until my hands blistered, teaching myself carpentry from library books and grainy YouTube videos. I hunted salvage yards for period fixtures, haggled with dealers for brass doorknobs, and once drove 6 hours for a set of 1890s stained glass panels. My bank account was a revolving door of overdraft fees, and I lived on ramen and coffee. There were days I'd collapse on a sleeping bag in the dining room, too tired to climb the stairs, wondering if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But then came the breakthroughs. I landed a client, a retired professor named Irma, who wanted her 1920s cottage restored. I showed her my sketches, walked her through my vision, and she trusted me. That job led to another, then another. Word spread. By 30 I'd formed Kinney Designs, just me and a laptop, but it was mine. The Victorian was my secret weapon. I'd invite clients over, let them see the hand-carved mantel I'd restored, the parquet floors I'd laid myself. They'd gasp, sign contracts, spread my name. I kept it quiet from my family, not out of shame, but because I didn't trust them to care. Nadine would have called it tinkering. Duane would have asked why I didn't get a real job. So I built in silence. The real aha hit 2 years ago. I was 36, standing in the finished library, walls lined with custom bookshelves, a chandelier I'd rewired myself, casting soft light. A local magazine wanted to feature the house in a spread on historic restorations. I almost said no, terrified of the exposure, but I let them in. The article went viral in design circles. Suddenly I was getting calls from developers, architects, even a TV producer. One name kept coming up, Quentin Pollard, a big-shot developer with a passion for old buildings. He wanted to meet, said my work was singular. I didn't tell my family about that either. I could already hear Velma's snort, Floyd's jab about getting lucky. By my 38th birthday, the Victorian was a gem. Every inch polished, every detail intentional. It wasn't just a house, it was proof I'd done what they said I couldn't. Quentin's team was circling, hinting at a deal to restore a dozen properties across the state. If I nailed the pitch, Kinney Designs would be set for years. I'd lie awake at night not from worry but from the thrill of it. This was my empire, built board by board, choice by choice. I thought I was untouchable, that the house and I were safe. I didn't know my family had been watching, not with pride but with envy. I didn't know they'd been digging into the trust, whispering about what's fair, planning to use my birthday to spring their trap. As I locked up the house that morning, sketching one last idea before the dinner, I felt like I'd won. I had no idea how close I was to losing everything. The morning of my 38th birthday felt like the edge of something big. I woke up in the Victorian, sunlight streaming through the stained glass panels I'd spent months restoring, casting jewel-toned patterns on the hardwood. I sipped coffee at the kitchen island, sketching final tweaks for my pitch to Quentin Pollard's team. The meeting was in 2 days, a chance to lock in a contract that had turned Kinney Designs from a one-woman show into a real player. I'd been up half the night perfecting my portfolio, photos of the Victorian's transformation front and center. Every polished banister, every salvaged tile, was a brick in the life I'd built. I felt like I was finally outrunning the shadow of my family's doubt. But that shadow loomed closer than I knew. Nadine had called twice that week, her voice clipped, reminding me about the birthday dinner. "We're all coming to your place, Marla. Don't make it complicated." I'd groaned, picturing the usual circus, Dwayne's self-important monologues, Velma's smug accounting tips, Floyd's bad jokes. I'd tried to push back, suggesting a restaurant, but Nadine shut it down. "It's tradition," she said, like that explained everything. I didn't have the energy to argue. Besides, I'd survived these dinners before. I'd smile, nod, and escape to my sketchbook when they left. I spent the day prepping, not just for the dinner, but for Quentin's meeting. I printed mock-ups, rehearsed my pitch, and even picked out an outfit: navy blazer, crisp white shirt, nothing flashy but sharp enough to say I meant business. The house was spotless, every surface gleaming. I'd set the dining table with my grandmother's old china, a small nod to her trust in me. The Victorian felt like an extension of myself, its walls holding my secrets, my victories. I caught myself smiling in the hall mirror thinking, "This is it, Marla, you're almost there." By late afternoon, nerves started creeping in. Not about the deal, I was ready for that. But about the dinner. Something felt off. Nadine's calls, Harlan's unusual silence when I'd seen him last, Velma's random text asking about the house's upkeep costs. I brushed it off as paranoia. They'd always been dismissive, but they wouldn't cross a line, right? I didn't know they'd already crossed it, that they'd been meeting behind my back, digging into the trust's fine print, plotting to use my birthday as their stage. As the clock ticked toward 6, I lit candles, arranged a centerpiece of wildflowers, and put on some soft jazz to drown out my unease. The Victorian smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, my attempt at playing host. I slipped into a simple green dress, one that made me feel grounded, and took a deep breath. I told myself it'd be fine. A few hours of their nonsense, then I'd be back to my sketches, my plans, my future. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, and my stomach twisted. I opened the door to Nadine's tight smile, Harlan's curt nod, and the rest trailing behind. Dwayne in his pressed suit, Velma clutching a bottle of cheap wine, Floyd already loud. My cousin Selma brought up the rear, her eyes darting around the foyer like she was casing the place. "Nice setup, Marla," Dwayne said, but his tone was flat, like he was humoring me. I forced a smile, ushered them in, and braced for the night. I didn't see the envelope in Nadine's purse, didn't catch the glance she shared with Velma. I didn't know they'd come armed with eviction papers, ready to demand the house as their fair share. As I poured wine and passed the bread, I thought I was hosting a dinner. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. The dining room felt like a stage, the Victorian's chandelier casting a warm glow over the table, but the air was thick with something sour. I sat at the head, trying to play host, passing the chicken and mashed potatoes while Nadine's eyes flicked around like she was appraising the place. Harlan carved the roast, silent as ever, while Duane launched into a story about his latest courtroom win. Velma nodded along, sipping her wine, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Floyd, already on his second beer, chuckled too loud at nothing. Selma, picking at her salad, kept glancing at Nadine, like she was waiting for a cue. I kept my head down, stirring my peas, hoping to coast through. It started small, like it always did. "So, Marla," Velma said, her voice syrupy, "still fiddling with your little projects?" She tilted her head, like she was asking about a kid's hobby. I forced a laugh, said something about a recent client, but Duane cut in. "Must be nice, playing house all day." His smirk was subtle, but it landed like a jab. Nadine chimed in, "It's a big place for one person, Marla. Don't you get lonely?" Her tone was all concern, but her eyes were cold, calculating. I mumbled something about loving the space, but my cheeks burned. The room felt smaller, the candlelight too bright. Floyd leaned back, grinning. "Bet this place costs a fortune to keep up. What's it worth now, anyway?" His question hung there, too pointed to be casual. I shrugged, said I hadn't checked, and tried to change the subject to Selma's new real estate gig. But she didn't bite. "Oh, I could sell this house in a heartbeat," she said, almost to herself. "Victorians are hot right now." Harlan grunted, his knife scraping the plate. I felt like I was being circled, their words weaving a net I couldn't see. Then came the backhanded compliments, the kind they'd perfected over years. Nadine sighed. "You've done something with the place, Marla. It's quaint, like I'd hung a few curtains, not rebuilt the damn thing from the studs up." Velma added, "It's bold, going your own way. Not everyone can pull off unconventional." Her pause was a knife twist. Duane chuckled. "Yeah, Marla's always been our free spirit." Free spirit. Code for aimless, flaky, the family joke. I gripped my fork, my knuckles white, and managed a tight smile. "Thanks," I said, voice steady, but inside I was screaming. I kept waiting for it to let up, for someone to ask a real question, to see me. But they didn't. They poked and prodded, their words dressed up as banter but heavy with disdain. Floyd asked if I ever thought about getting a real job, like my client list and magazine spread didn't exist. Selma mused about how some people inherit more than they deserve, her eyes on me. Nadine even brought up my grandmother, saying she'd be proud of how you've kept things interesting. Interesting. Not successful, not driven, just interesting. By the time dessert hit the table, store-bought cake because I'd run out of steam, I was exhausted, my defenses worn thin. I wanted them gone, wanted my house back, my peace back. I didn't notice Nadine's purse on the floor, the envelope peeking out. I didn't catch the way Velma's fingers twitched, like she was itching to move. I thought the worst was over, that I'd survived another round of their contempt. I didn't know they were just warming up, that the real blow was coming, dressed in legalese and years of bottled-up greed. As I cleared plates, their voices buzzing behind me, I felt the Victorians' walls watching, like they knew what I didn't. This wasn't just dinner. It was a reckoning. I was stacking plates in the sink, the clink of porcelain drowning out the hum of their voices, when Nadine cleared her throat. It wasn't her usual time for cake signal. It was sharper, like a gavel. I turned, sponge still in hand, and saw her standing at the head of the table, an envelope in her grip. The room went quiet, even Floyd's drunken chuckle fading. Harlan's eyes were on his hands, Duane's on Nadine, Velma's on me, hard, unblinking. Selma shifted in her seat, lips tight. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about candles or presents. "Marla," Nadine said, her voice all business. "We need to talk about the house." She slid the envelope across the table, its edge catching the candlelight. I didn't move. "What's this?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted. She didn't answer, just nodded at the envelope like it would speak for her. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart thudding, and picked it up. The paper was heavy, official. I opened it and saw the words eviction notice in bold, black type. My knees went soft. I looked up, scanning their faces. Nadine's grim resolve, Duane's folded arms, Velma's smug tilt of the head. Floyd wouldn't meet my eyes. Selma just stared at the table. "This is a joke, right?" I said, but my laugh was hollow. Nadine shook her head. "It's time we settled things, Marla. This house, the trust, it was never fair. We've been patient, but we're struggling. You've had your fun, but it's enough." Her words hit like a slap. Fun? I'd poured my life into this place, my savings, my soul. I looked at Harlan, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just sat there, jaw tight. Duane spoke up, his lawyer voice smooth as oil. The trust was poorly drafted, Marla. Grandma's intentions were unclear. We've consulted a lawyer. You've had sole use of this asset long enough. It's time to liquidate and divide. Liquidate? They wanted to sell my home, my work, my proof. I felt the room tilt, the Victorian's walls closing in. Velma leaned forward, her tone almost kind, like she was explaining math to a child. We're all in debt, Marla. Duane's firm is underwater, my investments tanked. Floyd's, well, you know. This house could fix everything. It's only fair. Fair. That word again, twisted into a weapon. I clutched the papers, my voice shaking. This is my home. Grandma left it to me. You can't just... We can, Nadine cut in. The lawyer says we have a case. You've been selfish, hoarding this place while we struggle. We're giving you 30 days to vacate or we'll escalate. Escalate. Like I was a tenant, not their daughter, their sister. Floyd finally mumbled, It's not personal, Marla. But his voice was weak, guilty. Selma added, You'll be fine. You're scrappy. Scrappy. Like I was a stray dog they were tossing out. I stood there, papers trembling in my hands, their faces blurring. Decades of their dismissal flashed through me. Every ignored sketch, every sneered hobby, every time they made me feel small. And now this. They weren't just cutting me out, they were erasing me, claiming the one thing I'd built without them. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers in their faces, but my throat was tight, my words gone. The Victorian felt like it was holding its breath, its creaks silent, waiting for me to fight. But I couldn't. Not yet. I was drowning in their betrayal. Their greed laid bare on my birthday, in my own dining room. I didn't know salvation was seconds away, that my phone, buzzing faintly in my pocket, was about to change everything. I stood frozen, the eviction notice crumpled in my fist, my family's eyes boring into me like I was a stranger in my own dining room. Nadine's voice echoed in my head. 30 days to vacate, and the weight of their betrayal pressed against my chest, stealing my breath. The Victorian's walls, usually my shield, felt like they were caving in. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them they couldn't take this from me, but no words came. Just silence, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of my phone in my pocket. I ignored it at first, too raw to care, but it buzzed again, insistent, like it knew something I didn't. Marla, we're not the bad guys, Velma said, her tone patronizing, like she was reasoning with a child. This is about family. Family. The word tasted bitter. Duane nodded, adding, You'll get your share after the sale. Be practical. Practical. Like I hadn't been practical every day, huh? Clawing my way to build Kinney designs while they sneered. Floyd mumbled something about moving on, and Selma just stared at her plate. Harlan still hadn't looked at me. I was alone, surrounded by them, the eviction papers a guillotine over my life's work. Then my phone buzzed a third time, louder, cutting through the fog. I pulled it out, more to escape their gazes than anything else. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Quentin Pollard's office. My heart skipped. I hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? Marla Kinney? The voice was brisk, professional, but warm. This is Tessa, Quentin Pollard's assistant. I'm calling with good news. I turned away from the table, clutching the phone, my family's eyes prickling my back. Tessa didn't pause. Quentin reviewed your portfolio last night, and he's blown away. He wants to move forward with the full contract, 12 historic properties, starting next month. It's a 7-figure deal, Marla. You're in. I blinked, the words not fully landing. 7 figures, 12 properties. My portfolio, the Victorian, my blood and sweat in every photo, had done it. I managed a shaky, You're serious? Tessa laughed. Dead serious. Quentin said your work's the best he's seen in years. He's emailing the contracts now. Congratulations. I mumbled a thank you, my head spinning, and hung up. The dining room was dead quiet. I turned back, phone still in hand, and saw their faces. Nadine's brow furrowed. Vilma's mouth half open, Duane's arms uncrossed. They'd heard enough. What was that? Nadine asked, her voice tight, like she sensed the ground shifting. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the eviction notice, then at them, and something clicked. This was my moment, the one I'd been building toward without knowing. That, I said, my voice steadier now, was my future calling. A developer just signed me to restore a dozen historic properties. 7 figures. My company, my work, my name. I held up the crumpled papers. And you think you can take this house? My house? Velma's face paled. Duane shifted, his lawyer cool cracking. Marla, let's not overreact, he started, but I cut him off. Overreact? You ambushed me on my birthday, demanded I give up my home and called it fair, but you don't get to decide what I've earned. Floyd looked away, Selma's fork clattered, and Nadine's lips pressed thin. Harlan finally met my eyes, but I didn't care. The phone call had lit a fire in me, not just of victory but of clarity. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I was Marla Kinney, and I'd built something they couldn't touch. The Victorian creaked softly like it was cheering me on, as I straightened, ready to tear their hypocrisy apart. The dining room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with their stunned silence as I held the eviction notice like a shield. Nadine's face was a mask of disbelief, her fingers twitching on the tablecloth. Duane's jaw worked, like he was chewing on a comeback he couldn't spit out. Velma's eyes darted between me and the phone, her smugness gone, replaced by something like panic. Floyd slouched, beer forgotten, and Selma's hands were knotted in her lap. Harlan just stared, his silence louder than ever. The Victorian's chandelier flickered, casting shadows that danced like they were egging me on. I wasn't shaking anymore. That call from Tessa had flipped a switch, my fear burned away, leaving only truth. You thought you could bully me out of my home, I said, my voice low but steady, slicing through the quiet. You thought I'd just hand it over because you waved some papers and called it family. I tossed the eviction notice onto the table, its pages fanning out like a bad hand of cards. But let's talk about family. Let's talk about how you've spent years pretending I don't exist unless you need something to mock. Nadine bristled. Marla, that's not. But I cut her off. Years of bottled-up words spilling out. No, you don't get to rewrite this. You celebrated Duane's every brief, Velma's every spreadsheet, but my work? My designs? You called them a phase. You laughed when I showed you my first project, Nadine. You, Harlan, didn't even look at the photos. Harlan flinched, just a flicker, but I saw it. I turned to Velma. And you, asking about the house's value last month, fishing like I wouldn't notice. You weren't checking on me. You were sizing up your cut. Duane tried to jump in, his lawyer voice back. Marla, this is emotional, not rational. The trust. I didn't let him finish. Rational? You're suing me for my home because you're broke. That's not rational, it's desperate. You didn't care about this house when I was patching its roof or rewiring its lights. You didn't care when I turned it into something people fly across the country to see. Now it's worth something, and suddenly it's family property? I laughed, sharp and bitter. You're not family, you're vultures. Floyd muttered, that's harsh, but his voice was weak, and I ignored him. Selma's eyes were wet, but I didn't soften. And you, Selma, telling me I'd be fine without this place? You think I'd let you sell my grandmother's legacy to fix your bad bets? I looked at them all, one by one. She gave me this house because she knew I'd honor it, not you. You'd have gutted it, sold it to the highest bidder, and called it practical. Nadine's voice was ice. You're being selfish, Marla. We're struggling. I stepped closer, my shadow falling over the table. Selfish? I built Kinney Designs from nothing while you looked down on me. I just landed a 7-figure deal because of this house, because of my work. You don't get to claim that now. I straightened, feeling the Victorian's strength in my spine. You're not taking this house. You're not taking anything. File your lawsuit. I'll fight you with everything I've got. I turned, grabbed my coat from the hall, and walked to the door. Their voices erupted. Nadine's sharp, Marla, wait! Duane's, let's talk this out! But I didn't look back. The front door's heavy oak swung shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gavel. I stepped into the cool night, the Victorian looming behind me, solid mine. Their scramble was their problem now. I'd exposed their greed, their lies, and I was done. The street was quiet, my breath visible in the air, and for the first time that night, I felt free. I drove straight to Irma's place after leaving the Victorian, my hands still trembling on the wheel, the eviction notice's weight lingering like a bad dream. Irma, my first big client, had become more than that over the years. She was family, the kind you choose. Her 1920s cottage sat on a quiet street, its porch light glowing like a beacon. I parked, took a deep breath, and let the night's chaos settle. The contrast hit me hard, my family's cold ambush versus the warmth waiting inside. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd snagged from the dinner, Velma's cheap Merlot, a petty trophy, and knocked. Irma opened the door, her silver hair loose, her smile instant. "Marla, on your birthday?" She pulled me into a hug, then spotted the wine and laughed. "Oh, your trouble." Inside, her living room was a haven, my handiwork in the restored crown molding, the soft sage walls, but mostly her energy. Her partner, Glenn, was there, stirring something garlicky on the stove, and their friend Tilda, a wiry photographer with a loud laugh, was sprawled on the couch. "The Queen arrives," Tilda called, raising her glass. I managed a grin, my chest loosening. We settled around Irma's scarred oak table, the kind of table that held stories in its scratches. Glenn served pasta, Tilda poured the Merlot, and Irma pressed me for details. "So, what's got you showing up unannounced, looking like you fought a dragon?" I hesitated. The dinner's raw edges still sharp, but these were my people. I told them everything, the snide remarks, the eviction papers, Nadine's fair share speech, the call from Tessa that turned it all upside down. They listened, really listened, their faces shifting from shock to fury to pride. "Those leeches," Tilda spat, slamming her glass down. "They didn't lift a finger for that house, and now they want it?" Glenn shook his head, his voice calm but firm. "They're jealous, Marla. You built something real, and they can't stand it." Irma reached for my hand, her grip warm. "Your grandmother would be dancing, seeing what you've done. That house is yours, and not just on paper." Their words were a balm, stitching up wounds I hadn't named. My family had tried to erase me, but here I was seen, whole. We talked late, the wine bottle emptying, the room filling with laughter and plans. Tilda wanted to photograph the Victorian for a gallery show, to rub it in their faces. Glenn offered to connect me with a lawyer friend, just in case they try anything stupid. Irma just smiled, her eyes twinkling. "You're unstoppable, Marla. That deal with Pollard, that's your legacy talking." I felt the knot in my chest unravel, replaced by something lighter, fiercer. These weren't just friends, they were my tribe, the ones who'd cheered every milestone my family ignored. As we cleared the table, Irma pulled out a small cake. Chocolate, homemade with a single candle. "Couldn't let your birthday pass without this," she said. They sang off-key and loud, and I laughed until my sides ached. Blowing out the candle, I didn't wish for anything. I didn't need to. This moment, surrounded by people who saw my fire, in a space I'd helped shape, was enough. The Victorian was still mine, my deal was real, and my family's betrayal couldn't touch this. Driving home later, the night air cool through the window, I felt the house calling me back, its walls ready to hold me up. My real family wasn't at that dining table. They were here in this messy, beautiful night, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. Back in the Victorian, the silence was a relief after the chaos of my birthday. The house felt like it was exhaling with me, its creaks soft, like a nod of solidarity. I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank onto the library's velvet sofa, the eviction notice still crumpled on the hall table. My phone buzzed, text from Nadine, a voicemail from Duane, even an email from Velma, all variations of "let's talk." I deleted them without reading. Their voices had no place here anymore. That night, under the glow of my rewired chandelier, I started building my fortress, brick by brick, with boundaries they couldn't cross. First, I called Glenn's lawyer friend, a gruff guy named Barney who specialized in trusts. Over coffee the next morning, he skimmed the eviction notice and snorted, "This is a bluff, Marla. The trust is ironclad. Your grandmother's lawyer was no amateur. They've got no case unless you roll over." He agreed to draft a cease and desist letter, warning them to back off or face countersuit. "Hit hard," he said, grinning. "They're banking on you folding." I nodded, feeling a spark of control. The Victorian was mine, legally and morally, and I wasn't budging. Then came the harder part, handling their outreach. Nadine called daily, her tone swinging from guilt-tripping. "We're still family, Marla. Too indignant, you're tearing us apart." Duane sent emails, all legalese and fake reason, hinting at mediation. Velma tried flattery, texting about how impressive my deal was, like she hadn't tried to gut me. Floyd left a slurred voicemail, half apologizing, half whining. Selma stayed silent, probably embarrassed. I didn't respond. Barney advised no contact until the legal dust settled, but it was more than that. I was done being their punching bag. I set rules: no family in the house, no unannounced visits, no answering their calls. I changed the locks, installed a security system, even got a P.O. box to keep my mail private. It felt extreme, but necessary. The Victorian had been my sanctuary, now it was my stronghold. When Nadine showed up one afternoon banging on the door, I watched her through the camera, her face pinched with frustration. "Marla, open up," she shouted. I didn't. She left after 10 minutes, and I felt a strange peace. I wasn't hiding, I was choosing who got access to me. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into prepping for Quentin's contract, meeting his team, touring the first properties. They were stunning, crumbling manors, old theaters, a 1900s schoolhouse, and I saw their potential just like I'd seen the Victorians. My crew, a small but loyal group I'd hired over the years, rallied around me. My lead carpenter, Otis, clapped my shoulder after a site visit. "You've got this, boss, screw the haters." Their belief kept me steady, a reminder I wasn't alone. A week later Barney called. The cease and desist had landed, and my family's lawyer, a budget hack Dwayne had roped in, backed off fast. "They're scrambling," Barney said, "no lawsuits coming." I exhaled, the weight lifting slightly. But I knew it wasn't over. They'd try again, maybe not with papers, but with guilt, tears, or new schemes. I'd be ready. I walked through the Victorian that night, touching the banister, the restored fireplace, feeling its strength in my bones. I'd built this life without them, and I'd protect it. My boundaries weren't just walls, they were a promise to myself, to the girl who'd sketched dreams in the attic, that I'd never let them dim my light again. With the legal threat buried and my boundaries set, I turned my focus to what mattered: the Victorian and the legacy I was building. The house wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of everything I'd fought for, a testament to my grandmother's trust in me. I'd spent years restoring its bones, but now I wanted it to do more. To be a beacon for others like me, dreamers written off by those too small to see. Kinney Designs was soaring, the contract with Quentin Pollard opening doors I'd only imagined. I decided to use that momentum to redefine what the Kinney name meant, on my terms. I started by opening the Victorian to the community. I'd always been private, guarding the house like a secret, but after the dinner, I saw its power differently. It wasn't just mine, it could inspire. I launched a series of workshops teaching locals about historic restoration, from stripping century-old paint to sourcing sustainable materials. My crew, Otis and a sharp tinkerer named Lila, helped run them. The first session packed the parlor with 20 strangers, their eyes wide as I walked them through the house's transformation. A teenager named Corey, all sketches and shy questions, reminded me of myself at 16. "You did this alone?" he asked, tracing the fireplace's carved ivy. "Mostly," I said, smiling, "but now you're here." Those workshops became my church, a place to pass on what I'd learned. Quentin's contract gave me the resources to go bigger. I pitched him on a side project, a nonprofit arm of Kinney Designs, to restore neglected historic buildings for community use: libraries, youth centers, art spaces. He loved it, offering seed funding and connections to city planners. The Victorian became our flagship, hosting fundraisers where Tilda's photos of my work hung on the walls, each frame a middle finger to my family's doubt. Irma and Glenn were there for the first event, pouring wine, joking with donors. "This is your empire, Marla," Irma whispered, her pride louder than any applause. I also honored my grandmother's memory in smaller ways. I found her old journals in the attic, faded pages of her own dreams for the house. She'd wanted it to be a gathering place, a haven. I framed her sketches, simple like mine, and hung them in the foyer, a quiet nod to her faith in me. I named the nonprofit after her, the Beatrice Kinney Fund, stripping the family name from Nadine's greed and tying it to something pure. Every project we took on, from a crumbling schoolhouse to a boarded-up theater, felt like a brick in that legacy. My family stayed distant, their silence a mix of shame and resentment. Dwayne sent one last email, offering a truce if I'd reconsider sharing. I didn't reply. Their absence didn't hurt anymore. It freed me. I filled the Victorian with new voices: Corey's eager questions, Lila's bad puns, Otis's steady presence. We'd work late, music blaring, laughing over pizza as we planned the next restoration. The house thrived, its creaks softer, like it was content. By winter the Victorian was a hub, its doors open to anyone who saw beauty in the broken. I stood on the porch one evening watching snow dust the stained glass windows, and felt a shift. The Kinney name wasn't theirs anymore, it was mine, etched in every board I'd sanded, every life we'd touched. I'd reclaimed it not for revenge but for purpose. The girl who'd hidden her sketches in the attic was gone. In her place was Marla Kinney, builder, dreamer, legacy maker, and no one, not Nadine, not Duane, could take that away. I'm sitting in the Victorian's library now, the fire crackling, its light dancing on the bookshelves I built with my own hands. It's been a year since that birthday dinner, since my family tried to rip this house from me, since I found the strength to stand my ground. The eviction notice is long gone, burned in this same fireplace, its ashes scattered like the doubts I used to carry. I walk through these rooms daily, touching the banisters, the restored tiles, and I feel a quiet peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but from knowing who I am, without anyone else's permission. Looking back, I see how the fight for this house was really a fight for myself. Every jab from Nadine, every smirk from Velma, every silence from Harlan, they were tests, not of my worth but of my resolve. I used to think I needed their approval, that their love would fill the holes their dismissal carved. But that night, when I walked out, the Victorian's door slamming behind me, I realized I'd been filling those holes all along, with my work, my passion, my chosen family. Irma's hugs, Tilda's fierce loyalty, Otis's steady hand, they're the ones who showed me what family means. The Victorian held me up, but I held it too, and together we proved I was enough. I think about my grandmother often, her journals still open on my desk. She knew this house would be my anchor, that its walls would teach me what she couldn't. I've kept her promise, not just by saving the Victorian, but by sharing it, through workshops, fundraisers, the Beatrice Kinney Fund. Corey's designing his first project now, a community center, and I see my younger self in his hungry eyes. Lila's leading a restoration crew, her laughter echoing in old buildings we're bringing back to life. This is my legacy, not a name on a deed but a ripple, touching lives I'll never meet. I don't hate my family anymore, I don't need to. They're out there, living their lives, their greed a shadow that can't reach me. I've heard whispers, Duane's firm stabilized, Velma's investments rebounded, but they don't come around. The cease and desist did its job, but my silence did more. I'm not their Marla anymore, the odd one to pity or plunder. I'm Marla Kinney, the woman who turned a crumbling house into a movement, who turned her pain into purpose. That's the peace I've found, not in their apologies, but in knowing my worth is mine to define. The Victorian creaks softly as I write this, its warmth wrapping around me. I don't need to prove anything now, not to them, not to myself. I'm home in every sense, and that's enough. Have you ever had to fight for what's yours, whether it's a dream, a home, or your own truth? I know how heavy that feels, how lonely, but also how it can set you free. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Share what you've stood up for, what you've built despite the odds. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You don't need anyone's permission to shine. You're enough, just as you are, and the life you're building, it's yours to shape. Keep going.